So I have two challenges. First one, which probably most of you know, I have way too many slides for the time, and I have a reputation for that from my old API Academy days. And the second one is I come right after Ronnie, right? So you're in this thrall, you're expecting some very good presentation, and I have to disappoint you. These are stories from the trenches. You just saw a wonderful model on how to think about microservices. And with that vision, a year ago, roughly, I joined a company, a German company, 300 million euros revenues. It's kind of the LexisNexis plus Intuit for the German market. And I started implementing that vision. And what I learned from that is kind of what I want to give you in the next 30 minutes. Quick show of hands. Who here is a manager? And who is a developer? Wow. Okay, so it's 1/3, 2/3. Now, I never believed I would have to say this. Dear managers, this presentation is for you. Because when I did this presentation, I actually realized it's quite different from the presentations I used to do, right? I used to do on-stage coding. I used to be kind of about what frameworks to use. And now you will find this is about culture. This is about steering. This is about management. This is about trying to deal with change. You know, we all talk about change, but actually implementing change. So the company I work for called Haufe Group is 80 years old, and which is, you know, it's a decent age, and it was a publisher which turned into a digital service provider. And they did that transition well. They were one of the first who did it, but with it comes a lot of technical debt, right? And that's what we're going to talk about. So when I came there, I was first introduced to something called Atlantic, right? It's like the ocean which brings together the different continents of our back office. And it was the Haufe Group service platform. And no, it's not an ESB, but it was worse, right? It was the attempt to provide all back office services, user management, license management, product information, all in one so-called service platform, except it was also all in one deploy artifact. So you had a lot of services which sometimes had things to do with each other, sometimes not, but all in one deploy model. And it took literally 5 to 10 days to deploy into production. Consequently, it took months to test because it talked to almost everything, like an ESB, right? It kind of combined the worst of two worlds, you know, like one deployment model with lots of services. With the ESB, I talk to everyone, so if you get me wrong, the whole business kind of stops. 2 releases a year. White box testing, I never knew that existed. What do I mean by white box testing? They did make a great effort into testing, but what they did is they tested the APIs and then checked if what arrived at the data schema at the database level matched what they had fed in. We come back to that in a second. It was not deployed to the cloud, but on hosted hardware. And for cost reasons, there weren't like multiple instances of it. There was just one. So every upgrade was kind of I wanted to say death wish. That's kind of wrong, but it was a one-way ticket. And I would test not equal production. It didn't dawn to me what that actually meant until there were teams who said, we want to test our new services against production. I said, no. You test against the integration environment, the test environment. They said, no. We want to test against production. I say, why? Well, it never works if we do against test environment. I said, you're not going to do that. That's not right. So I pulled rank. They tested against test environment. They went into production. Didn't work. I'm not quite sure that did a lot of good things to my reputation in the company. But surely, I came from the API Academy. I have 20 years software development experience, so microservices to the rescue, right? It just seemed to be such a perfect fit. And as we heard from Ronnie, it has all the right attributes, and I don't know. You're going to get my punchline, right? So, fast forward. This kind of looks nice, right? Making it nicely, or that was kind of what we all wanted. 9 months later, it was a complete fiasco. We had to stop the project. And it wasn't because of any single thing, right? It was just like let's start with the first one, right? I mentioned white box testing. When you do white box testing and you actually check against the data schema, the moment you try to touch that data schema, you lose all test coverage, right? And not just for that one schema, but for the whole thing. So the team was extremely proud that they had hundreds of test cases. The moment we tried to move one table off to the side, we did something very simple, user management, right? How hard can it be to move user management out of that monolith and make it separate? And it turned out to be really hard because suddenly we were faced with that our entire test coverage was going to hell, right? And if you are supposed to make 300 million euros a year, not having test for a single ticket to production, for a one-way ticket to production, doesn't quite feel right. Scope creep. That team was seriously overworked and understaffed. So when they got the chance to do something right, they tried to do a lot more right than just simply carve something out, right? Well, why don't we use a new application server? Why don't we restructure the code? Well, I hate that code anyhow. Let's just rewrite it. I'm sure most of you have seen this before. And it's not bad or ill will. It's kind of like there's all this frustration kind of piled up on that piece of software, and that when you open the floodgates and you say, let's make it nicer, let's make it better, it just overwhelms. It's a natural instinct for people then to kind of go a little bit overboard. Project complexity. And I mean, the way, and this is kind of, again, the part which I hadn't realized, when you're at the CTO level, at the executive level, the leading indicator for projects going out of control is that you suddenly get filtered up through the chain of something which you think is very confined and restricted. We need more developers. We're going to make the date, but we just need more developers. And if I tell you one thing, if you take one thing away, dear managers, if you hear that, your yellow flags should go up, right? I love this. Agile became fragile, right? Because it was an agile team. They had Scrum, they had a PO, they had a Scrum Master. So this was all there, right? But increasingly, it was like a high RPM, but very little efficiency. It seemed to be the amount of code being generated in terms of affecting the change got less and less, but the amount of code grew and grew. And ultimately, when we actually had to stop this project because I could no longer justify the money going in, the team poured their heart in, right? They really tried to make this work. And to tell them, guys, this thing is against the wall, we have to stop this, they were destroyed. So, we had this emergency meeting of the CIO, myself, and 2 or 3 of the key players in this. And you're going to meet Irakli later today. Him and I always had this debate about kind of a tweet, or I don't know if it was a tweet. I think he now put it in, you see the link down here, from Fowler, kind of stating very early in the microservices discussion about you have to be that tall. And Irakli really hates that statement. And he wants to do something. He says, no, you don't have to be that tall. You can do it otherwise too. And it would be interesting. I don't know if Irakli is here yet. I have to catch up with him on this. I remembered it at that point, right? And Fowler said, which I would now sign with my blood, before you even attempt microservices, these are the basic hygienic features you must have in place. Otherwise, I think you're going to be doomed. And remember white box testing? I added that one to the list. And then I remembered this. I don't know who here is has read about lean transformation, Toyota, a few, right? There was, in one of the books, I don't remember where, it was like, you cannot do a so-called lean transformation without first stabilizing, then optimizing, then transforming, right? Because if you haven't stabilized it, you don't even know what to optimize for. And only once you have optimized, you know what you need to transform it in, right? And what we try to do is we try to transform before stabilizing, right? There was no reason, the jump was just too far for that team to execute it. And this is, over this year, it kind of all came together. And I don't know how universal this is or not. This is kind of my mental model looking at technology projects or products. And I sense that when in any kind of product, in any kind of team, you have those three bubbles or areas which are in alignment. No matter what team I go into, right, there is a certain culture, and this is a leading indicator. There's a certain culture, and that culture informs technology, and that culture and structure kind of, there's a weird way how a structure informs culture, and culture informs structure. But ultimately, in any kind of mature project or any kind of team you go into, there is a balance between those three things. So if you start, so kind of imagine this kind of hovering in space, right? Kind of like being balanced out. Now you come in, you know, as a brash CTO or manager or lead architect, and you say, well, we obviously need to go somewhere else, right? Maybe from safety, you need to go to speed. Maybe from a technology which is end of life, you need to go to a different technology. And you kind of pour in a new technology, right? And you kind of drag technology up. The thing starts to get out of balance. And there's this famous expression, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. So if you have a safety-driven culture and a risk reduction culture driving on reducing risk, any kind of technology you're going to pour into is going to be used in the same way, right? You think JavaScript is going to increase the speed in a Java team? Well, think again. They're going to use JavaScript the same way they use Java. You're not going to see a bump up, right? And culture kind of almost always wins. It's going to snap it back, and you're not going to get the output. Similarly with structure. So what became clear to us was that in order, and this is kind of where the title comes from, in order to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, we needed to look at all three things at the same time. And we needed to kind of not just accept the structure and the culture as is, but in a very short period of time, kind of try to address all three bubbles at the same time. In whatever way. We didn't know how to do it at that point. And so we reset the project, but we kept the team because, you know, those people really poured their heart in, but it was just the circumstances were such that they couldn't succeed. We went to strictly time-boxed phases. We said, we're gonna try to do something different for the next 3 months and then kind of reassess. This is maybe surprising. Do you guys know the term Wedgile? Waterfall agile, right? Don't laugh about it. No, I'm serious, right? I have this debate with my agilistas, I call them, who say, no, agile is the answer. And honestly, I'm not quite sure anymore, right? So we went to, who of you here knows critical chain project management? Okay, who here knows The Goal, the book The Goal? The guy actually wrote another book called Critical Chain, which was a follow-on where he took the theory of constraints and applied it to project management. And I only learned this afterwards, that the project team actually put that in place, and I'm going to have a few slides to kind of give you the gist of it. So we went back to Gantt charts, we went back to resource planning, we went back to this is how we're going to do it over the next 3 months, and who is going to deliver what. It was waterfall. Still, sure, there was still Scrum, there were still dailies, there was still a lot of the trappings of Agile, but on a 3 months kind of box, it was a waterfall process. Marco, my tech lead, who kind of led this new project, he put a lot of time and effort. This was a team in Timișoara in Romania, so that's a couple of hours away from us in Germany. He put a lot of effort in culture, attitude, and challenges. So he traveled there every other week to be on site, to talk with the team, to empower them, to go out and play squash. Wasn't so good for his back. Luckily, he dropped out for a couple of weeks to recover after the first 3 months. And this was essentially in January, we put that in place. And the first phase was January, February, March timeframe, March, April timeframe. We did all this, right? It was now in Docker, the dev and test environments. We picked Azure as a cloud to deploy to. We picked GoCD as the deployment pipeline, and we went strictly for immutable server, right? Nothing of this is rocket science. Nothing of this is something we kind of dreamed up. It was just like a collection of like best practices to put in place to get at least dev and test automated. And lo and behold, we went down from 5 to 10 days to 30 minutes within 3 months. So anyone who tells me that Agile cannot work if things get tight, here it is. And I have seen this actually, and I'm going to talk about this in lessons learned in another project as well. Sometimes you need to provide an external structure, especially in projects which are in trouble. You need to kind of provide an external framework to get the team back on track and get them back believing in themselves, right? And the phase 2 is ongoing, and this is where we actually try to get rid of that white box testing and do a complete black box testing, but automated push button as part of the CI pipeline. So there's no, you notice something? There's nothing about microservice in here. But the key is if we don't get this, we don't even have to think about microservices to start with. So these are 2 slides, or actually a bunch of slides from my project manager. This is how he kind of summarized the situation, right? Team, stakeholder, and line managers. Just going to click through. Stakeholder says, well, we need to have the run biz go away with that fancy microservice architecture. You screwed it up once, don't do it again. And the team was extremely unhappy. We need more clear requirements. We didn't have milestones, lack of trust, bad communication, yada, yada, yada. And ultimately, there were doubts then if the team actually can perform. And I don't know if companies where people are working like in India, in Romania, there's always this kind of hidden bias. Well, are they working as well as we need them to do? Those questions, usually everyone likes the cost savings, but when those teams like we in the US or in Germany screw up, we kind of say, well, that's lessons learned. If those teams screw up, it's always like, well, maybe they weren't up to the task in the first place. And yeah, so 3 months later, it's really, I mean, I'm not kidding you. This is not my view. This was actually also reflected by the team. And one of the things, remember, it's about also culture. Our goal is not to destroy this team. Our goal is not to get this out, but the team trust in itself again that they can do this kind of work. So after those 3 months, this team, which was like the poor dogs, went out and spoke at our events. We sent them to conferences. They spoke about it, and suddenly they were like, wow, you guys pulled this off? And there's nothing more healing than kind of coming out of the cellar and being back on stage and kind of people looking at you and saying, hey, how did you guys do this? This is amazing. And so this also did a lot of good things for the team and the coherence of the team. So yada, yada, yada. And remember, this is the same team which burned through a couple of millions just 3 months before. So critical chain project management. I kind of included them because I don't think we still remember this. It was like 94, 95 when he came up with this. It's actually a very simple project. And it assumes that when you do estimations, right, the median is here, but usually people kind of add some padding to it, right? And it's not that they kind of want to skew the system, but they just say, well, you know, I feel it's 2 weeks, but out of my experience, let me just add 1 more week, right? So you estimate with 3 weeks. And that leads actually to something which, one is called Parkinson's law, where you finish your work in 2 weeks, and then you still have 1 week time, right? So you're going to gold plate it. And then there's the student syndrome, which you do other things. And then, you know, for a week, because you have to do your inbox, you have to do some other cleanup stuff, and then you do your work in 2 weeks. The point is, you will fill the buffer to 5 days, irregardless if it just takes you 3. And so what that means, and this is, you know, almost like a throwback to the old times, right? Remember Agile, we don't need this anymore. When you have a chart like this, you always kind of align here, but the moment this actually kind of bounces beyond, it starts throwing off the overall plan. And the thing is, we were challenged on this, right? I mean, people came back and said, well, if we believe in Agile, we should empower the team to do what's right. And I told them, well, look, the team gives me an estimate to do what we need them to do in 6 months. In 6 months, this team is dead. I don't have a business case if this takes 6 months. What I have to do then is I have to fight off the pressure to essentially move this project away from that team. So you can be beautiful, but dying in beauty is still dead, right? So we had to somehow find a way to align all this thinking about self-determination with the realities of the business. I didn't have 6 months. I had 3 months. So essentially what Olaf did is he cut off, and this is an arbitrary number, he just cut off from all the estimates 33%. You know, kind of gave us back into 3 months. But then he didn't just make them disappear, but he kind of added them as a buffer. So the team saw this, but there was a buffer built in, which was kind of the accumulated stuff which he cut out of the tasks. And now, essentially, the tracking goes like this, right? This is the best case. This is the pace where you have to pay attention to, and this is when the critical chain kicks in. That means you're running out of buffer time. And so we could kind of almost have a hands-off approach to that team in terms of when things get done, because we had this buffer. And you only monitored the overall buffer time, how much it would still be, right? And only when you started exceeding that buffer, you would start taking corrective action. And the beauty of this is that you don't micromanage the team at this point, right? You kind of have, it's almost like in between a strict waterfall and Agile, there's this place in between where you give an external expectation over a longer period of time, but you leave the team, you accept that the team in some tasks kind of exceeds it, in some tasks, in sometimes kind of goes beyond it, and that for as long as the end date is being hit, you're fine, right? So I can only compare it to a way in the middle between waterfall and Agile. So, and then all you get essentially up on the management chain, you only give up if everything here is essentially team intern, this one kind of gets attention upwards. And that kind of also creates that breathing room for the team to deal with, you know, someone gets sick and stuff like this. So, lessons learned. There was actually another slide, but it seems to be the slides weren't updated. Yes, you need to be that tall. If you start with microservices, go back to that link, which is on that previous slide. You need to be that tall. Don't do it if you don't have a basic release automation and test automation. You're going to kill yourself. Focus on creating the foundation for throughput later. So we did this now for half a year, 2 phases. First phase on the release automation, second phase on the test automation. We are now going in and restructuring the team. We're going to make it not longer an IT support team, but make it a product team. It will have a product owner. It will have a backlog. And it's a product team which owns their APIs, whose customers are all those other units who are using their APIs. So we're trying to also get a different dynamic in. But it was critical that for those 6 months, we kind of created the foundation for that team now to kind of create speed, create change. This is something, and I kind of mentioned this, that I had this in a different project too. When you need to do a pivot, which is just a fancy word for you're running down the wrong street and you need to kind of make a turn, otherwise you're going to run against the wall. Don't think that in an established organization, there's still no there's no celebration of failure, at least not in the ones I have seen, right? A failure is a failure is a failure in the eyes of a lot of people in large established organizations. You cannot think that the team can deal with that alone. This is the moment where, at least in our case, we need to kind of put in some external structure to stabilize this team again. Leadership becomes important at that point. Someone who stands in front of the team, shields it, says, I trust in you, but at the same time gives them guidance on how to regain their trust in themselves. I call that going from agile to agile. And once they regain that trust, you can start taking your hands off again, right? And a mature team which trusting itself, they can work agile. But don't think that a demotivated and fearful team will get you the results in a purely agile manner. At least not for us. If you need to do a pivot and I hope I'm not hurting anyone's political lines, but Donald Rumsfeld left us with a bunch of very useful phrases. Actually, this was Colin Powell. If you do a pivot and reset, and you know that the team is kind of struggling with it, do it with shock and awe. Don't kind of, so we picked 3 months because it seemed to be so outrageous after the team had just spent 9 months trying to extract the user management. So we put a challenge out, because what it is if they can meet that challenge, it erases the stain of failure from that team, because they met an even bigger challenge no one was thinking that they could pull off. If it were 6 months until they released, I think the external perception of that team failing would have kind of sank in, and I don't know. But so we are very aggressive in almost challenging the team to do the almost impossible with our help to kind of get the motivation back on track. Remember, culture, technology, and structure. Leadership is important. I don't know how it is in your organizations. I see a lot of discussions where people say leadership is not longer important, right? Agile, the teams kind of get self. Over and over again, I find that when things get tight, leadership is important. And that doesn't need to be dictatorial leadership. It might mean leadership in terms of supporting the team, getting the team believe in itself. But it's down to individuals, right? If Marco and Olaf hadn't done this and had gone in and provided that leadership to the team, I don't think the team itself would have been able to do it. This is also important. Don't go out and take your monolith. And this was actually interesting at KubeCon. There were a lot of different talks about where people kind of start slicing off things off their monolith. Don't cut off the monolith just for the sake of cutting it off. What we are actually planning to do is once now the new team is in place, we want to identify where do we need actually speed and innovation. Where is the place where we need to have most changes? And that's the piece we're going to take out, so that if user management needs to iterate fast, it's not longer bogged down by all the other services. Ultimately, if there's a service we don't touch because it's for a legacy business, it can remain in the monolith for as long as it needs. If I can deploy this in 20 minutes automatically, I simply don't care. I don't even have a business case touching that thing anymore, because remember, dying in beauty is still dead. And this is actually going to be an experiment. The team which used to take care of the service platform, because it was an established platform, was more driven like an IT team, right? People opened tickets against that team. The team kind of got this flood of tickets and tried to kind of patch it, and they never had really time to think strategically about it. Coming from an API-first approach, for me, this is a product team. Its product are the APIs it gives to other business units, and I want this team to run that way because I think it also kind of creates you're not longer just the guy who solves the ticket, but this is your product. You start having a pride in it. You want to be the best API for your other units. So I want to change the motivation and the way people look at their work away from I'm just the dumb guy who has to solve the tickets, there to, well, yes, you guys build products for customers. I build products for you. And we're going to experiment, and this is maybe something I can give you guys an update in a year or so, with an approach which was first done by PayPal called Inner Source. Have you heard about that? Just Google it, PayPal Inner Source, which takes the approach of open source but applies it to back office, to back office services. So a way of teams who need a feature of a back office service can actually do it themselves, right? It's kind of hunting, but in the way the team has to put in the extra effort to maybe add something to the user management, which by that time is fully automated. You can spin up your own test environment. But the team actually regains they're not longer dependent on that someone else on the other side does the change for them. You empower the teams to build those changes themselves. So we are hoping to experiment with that. PayPal had some extremely positive results with that. There are some challenges with it, but Denise, who does this, said that one of the teams which always used to be running at 150% of load they had 2 trusted committers on the team, now spends 80% of their time on actually developing the platform strategically, and two people on the team coordinate all the features coming in through pull requests from the product teams who need new features in that service. And I thought that was one of those stunning reversals of a dynamic which I just want to see for myself if that's really possible. And I think that's it.